A man's body struck her porch boards with a sound like a dropped sack of grain, and Ruth Kavanagh was out the door with her lamp before she'd fully woken from the doze she'd fallen into over her mending, the last of her candle guttering behind her in the small house at Dry Bluff. He lay crumpled against her step, a big man gone terribly slack, his fine coat and good boots utterly at odds with the gray, sweat-soaked pallor of his face, his breath coming in shallow, fever-quick pulls that she recognized at once, having nursed her own husband through his final illness 2 winters back with the same helpless, careful attention. She had no notion who he was. He carried no letters, no papers, nothing that named him, only a fine watch and a signet ring that spoke of money she herself had not seen the like of in years. "Sir," she said, crouching beside him, pressing the back of her hand to his burning forehead. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes cracked open, glassy and unfocused, fixed on her face without any real recognition in them. "Water," he managed, barely a whisper, and then his eyes rolled back and he was gone from her again, lost somewhere in the fever's grip. She should have gone for the doctor in town, 3 miles distant, but one look at his labored breathing told her there was no time to spare on the round trip, and besides, she had little coin left for a doctor's fee even for herself, let alone for a stranger who might not live to see morning regardless of what any doctor did for him. There was only what she knew, what her own hands could manage, and the small store of quinine bark and willow tea she kept for her own occasional chills. She dragged him inside with an effort that left her arms trembling, got him onto her own bed since it was the only one in the house, and set to the long work of fighting a fever with nothing but cool cloths, bitter tea, and the stubborn refusal to let another person die in her care the way her husband had, 2 winters past, despite everything she'd done. Her husband Daniel had taken sick with a fever much like this one, in the same small house, and she had sent for the doctor only after 2 days of hoping he'd break the fever on his own, a delay she had spent every day since regretting with a fierceness that had never fully faded. The doctor, when he finally came, had said plainly that an earlier summons might have made all the difference, and Ruth had carried those words through 2 winters of widowhood like a stone lodged beneath her ribs, unable to set them down no matter how she tried. She would not make that mistake twice, whatever it cost her in candles or bark tea or sleep, not while there was still breath left in the stranger on her bed to fight for. 3 days he burned and shivered by turns, mumbling names she didn't recognize, orders about cattle drives, a foreman named Duggan, numbers that meant nothing to her, and 3 nights Ruth sat beside him sponging his brow, coaxing broth and tea past his cracked lips a spoonful at a time, praying in the wordless, exhausted way of a woman who has run out of formal prayers and has only her own aching need left to offer up. She had little enough to spare for the effort. Her husband's death had left her with the small house, a scrap of garden and precious little else, and she took in mending and laundry from the town's better-off families to keep herself fed through the winters. Nursing this stranger meant days away from her mending basket, days of burning her own candle stock, and using up tea and bark she'd meant to last the season, and she gave every bit of it without once calculating the cost, because that was simply what a person did for another person dying on their doorstep, cost or no cost. On the 4th morning his fever broke at last, sweat soaking clean through her one good quilt, and his eyes opened clear and aware for the first time, finding her face in the gray dawn light with an expression of dawning, bewildered gratitude. "Where," he said, his voice a dry rasp, "am I? And who, might I ask, has been keeping me alive?" "Dry Bluff," she said, wringing out a fresh cloth for his brow. "My house, though I don't know your name any better than you seem to know mine. You collapsed on my porch 3 nights back, burning with fever, and I hadn't the heart to leave a dying man on my doorstep without at least trying to save him." Something moved across his gaunt face, surprise, and beneath it something warmer. "Emmett," he said. "Emmett Rademacher. I run cattle through 3 territories, or I did before the fever took me somewhere south of here, and I lost the better part of a week to it, apparently." He tried to push himself upright and failed, weak as a newborn calf, and she pressed a firm hand to his shoulder to still him. "I don't suppose you know how a man of my supposed standing came to be delivered to your porch like a foundling. I found you exactly as you were, sir, with no papers and no company, only that fine ring and watch that told me you'd fallen a good deal further than you were used to falling," she said. "I didn't ask questions of an unconscious man. I only tried to keep him breathing." Word of the stranger in Ruth's house traveled fast through Dry Bluff, as word of anything unusual always did in so small a place. And within the week, she had fielded no fewer than 3 visits from neighbor women equal parts concerned and hungry for gossip, none of whom bothered to disguise their curiosity about what manner of fine gentleman had turned up half-dead on a poor widow's porch. "You want to be careful, Ruth," old Mrs. Purcell told her at the mercantile, not unkindly but plainly, "nursing a strange man alone in your house, whatever his condition. Folks will talk, and talk is about all a widow's good name has left to protect her." "Let them talk," Ruth said, surprising herself with the steadiness of it. "I'll not let gossip decide whether a dying man gets tended to, Mrs. Purcell, not after what my hesitation cost Daniel. If my name suffers for showing a stranger the same mercy I'd want shown to me, then my name will simply have to bear it." She left the mercantile with her chin high, though her hands trembled faintly on her market basket the whole walk home, unused as she was to defying the town's expectations so openly. He mended slow over the following 2 weeks, regaining strength a little each day, and Ruth watched the truth of him emerge from beneath the fever the way a person emerges from a hard winter. Emmett Rademacher was, indeed, one of the wealthiest cattlemen in 3 territories, a man whose name moved markets and whose word settled range disputes other men would have settled with guns. He had been thrown from a spooked horse some 10 miles out, wandered feversick and disoriented for the better part of a day before some instinct or blind luck had brought him stumbling to her door, the last coherent thing he remembered being a desperate need to find any shelter at all before the fever took him under completely. "You could have let me lie there and gone for help instead of spending your own stores on a stranger," he said one evening, watching her mend by lamplight with the particular attention of a man unused to observing quiet domestic work and finding it, unexpectedly, absorbing. "You'd have lost nothing by it, and I'd likely have survived regardless, given how you tell it. Why go to such trouble and expense for a man you owed nothing?" Ruth set down her needle, considering the question honestly rather than offering some easy, modest deflection. "Because I buried a husband 2 winters back who might have lived if someone had fought harder for him, sooner," she said. "The doctor came too late, and I've never stopped wondering whether different choices, made faster, might have kept him breathing. I couldn't undo that. But I could sit up 3 nights running for a stranger on my doorstep rather than let another man die of my hesitation. That's the whole of my reasoning, Mr. Rademacher. I didn't do it for reward." Emmett was quiet, watching her with the particular attention of a man reassessing everything he thought he understood about the world he'd built his fortune within. He had spent so many years surrounded by people, calculating his worth in dollars and cattle head that he had nearly forgotten a person could be moved by something as plain and old-fashioned as guilt over a husband's death, and a stubborn refusal to let it repeat itself in a stranger. Something moved behind his eyes that looked, to her surprise, very much like humility. "I've spent the better part of 20 years being courted for my fortune by every family with an unmarried daughter in 3 territories," he said finally. "I've grown so used to being valued for what I own that I'd nearly forgotten what it was to be helped simply because a person couldn't bear to watch another person suffer. You've reminded me of something I'd let myself lose sight of, Mrs. Kavanagh, and I find I'm more grateful for that than for the nursing itself, though the nursing certainly kept me breathing to be grateful at all." He stayed at Dry Bluff longer than his recovery strictly required, finding reasons, a lingering weakness in his legs, a wish to properly repay her hospitality, a genuine reluctance, though he did not say this part aloud for some while yet, to leave the quiet house and the steady, unassuming woman who had saved his life, without once asking who he was or what it might be worth to her. It was Ruth who finally addressed the lingering plainly, some 3 weeks after the fever broke, mending his good coat by the window while he sat recovering his strength in the mismatched chair she'd pulled close to the fire. "You're strong enough to travel now, Mr. Rademacher," she said, not looking up from her needle. "I don't say it to hurry you off. I say it because I expect a man of your business has affairs 3 territories wide that have gone unattended a full month, and I wouldn't want you staying out of some misplaced sense of debt to a widow who only did what any decent soul would." "I'm not staying out of debt," he said, and something in his voice made her look up despite herself. "I've had a month, Ruth, to watch you tend a stranger with more devotion than most wives show a husband, to watch you stretch a widow's meager stores without complaint, to watch you laugh at my poor attempts at humor and scold me for rising before I ought, exactly the way, I imagine, you must have scolded your own husband in gentler days. I came to your porch a dying stranger, and I find I don't wish to leave it a stranger still. I wish to leave it, if you'll have me, a man asking for your hand." Ruth's needle stilled entirely, her breath catching somewhere between disbelief and a hope she hadn't let herself feel in 2 long, hard winters. "You're a cattle baron, Emmett. I'm a poor widow who takes in mending to keep her stove lit. The whole territory would call it a foolish match." "The whole territory can call it whatever it likes," he said, rising, crossing the small distance of her kitchen with the steady purpose of a man no longer weakened by fever, but only by uncertainty of her answer. "I've spent 20 years being pursued for my fortune by women who never once sat up 3 nights running for my sake without knowing my name or my worth. You saved my life expecting nothing in return, Ruth Kavanagh, and I find that is worth considerably more to me than a match the territory would consider sensible." She looked at him a long moment, at the man who had collapsed nameless on her doorstep, fevered and friendless, and risen, slowly, into someone she had come, without quite noticing the process, to love for himself rather than for anything he owned or any fortune his name carried, and found her answer waiting exactly where her nursing hands had known it all along, patient as the fever's breaking dawn. "Then I'll have you," she said, "though I'll warn you plainly, Emmett Rademacher, that I intend to keep mending your coats myself with my own 2 hands, fortune or no fortune, since it seems the surest way I know to keep a man close enough to watch over properly for the rest of his days." He laughed, full and unguarded, the sound of a man who had nearly died a nameless stranger and found instead a home, and when he kissed her hand there in her small kitchen at Dry Bluff, Ruth thought that of everything her 2 hard winters of widowhood had taken from her, they had, in exchange, taught her exactly how to recognize a love worth keeping when it collapsed, quite literally and gratefully, onto her doorstep in the dead of a fevered night, asking nothing of her but the mercy she had already freely given.